Do you recognise this tune? Alright, how about this one? They may be familiar, but perhaps don't sound quite right. That's because they're part of an experimental album called Tuplets for Toddlers, which has taken familiar nursery rhymes but played around with the underlying numbers, the counts, the rhythms, the tempos. It's a fascinating collaboration between a number of talented composers, but we'll get more into that soon. But first, let's go back a few steps and to today's very special guest, Alan Stewart. Now, Alan's an important man in my life because he composes and performs much of the music you'll hear across all my videos and podcasts, not just Numberphile. To me, he's some kind of genius. I actually call him the Maestro. A nickname I'm not entirely sure he likes, but he's way too polite to stop me. Like me, Alan lives in the UK, but he's not a full-time musician. In fact, he's a school teacher. And that's where our discussion begins. Did you always want to be a physics teacher? Was that what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, I don't think I knew what I wanted to be at all when I was at school. I kind of drifted into physics because I found it quite easy, I suppose. And I don't want to sound big-headed like that, but I just found it came naturally to me. Maths, on the other hand, did not come easily to me, and I really struggled with A-level maths when I was at college myself. But no, physics, I always found like it just made a lot of sense to me. And so when it came time to choose what I wanted to study at university, physics just seemed like a very natural choice.
Did you want to be a physics teacher, or did you want to, be making discoveries and working at the Large Hadron Collider and figuring out how black holes work?
So during my degree, I think there was a lot of pressure for us to decide upon our career, and I was still very, very uncertain about what I wanted to do until I got to third year, and I took part in something called the Undergraduate Ambassador Scheme, where undergraduates were sent into local secondary schools to teach science. And that unit of my degree, I absolutely loved that. I loved sharing science ideas with the students at the secondary school. I loved how it was a very active thing to be doing. Yeah, I decided I really want to be a teacher when I graduate.
So if I was to ask your students now what kind of physics teacher you are, what would they say? Would they say, oh, he's jokey, or he's fun, or he's strict, or he's like... What kind of teacher is Mr. Stewart?
I don't think I'm jokey, and I'm not even sure if I'm that fun. What I try to do is I quite like thinking things through a lot, and perhaps including a little bit of philosophy as well. So when I teach, I'm very eager to draw ideas out of the students and have a lot of discussion work. And I like that sort of theatrical way that you can perhaps build a bit of suspense. So rather than just telling the students, here's what Rutherford discovered about the atom, I like to try and turn it into a bit of a story. That's what I hope my students would say.
Alan, you said that math wasn't your strong point, but we always hear that mathematics underpins physics so much. So how do you reconcile those two things? Is mathematics not this essential tool to be a good physicist?
You're absolutely right. Maths is crucial for physics. It's always said that maths is the language of physics. So although I didn't find that maths came easily to me at all, and so I had to do a lot of work, and that I think came as a bit of a shock to me when I was 16 years old, because up to that point in school, I think I'd found quite a lot of things not too difficult, except for foreign languages, which I was really, really, really bad at. So I just had to do a lot of work. I remember sitting for hours and hours doing maths homework and then 10 minutes doing physics homework.
Let's talk music then, because music's not like your job, your occupation, but it's a huge part of your life. How did music become part of your life?
That's a good question. How did music become part of my life? So when I was a kid, my mum, I think, tried very hard to encourage me to learn an instrument. So when I was 6 years old, I played recorder, and when I was 9, I played the violin, except I didn't really play either of those instruments because I didn't have any internal motivation to practice, and I gave up pretty quickly. But then when I was 13, I signed up for something called Duke of Edinburgh. The Duke of Edinburgh Award is like this scheme that encourages young people to get involved in lots of different activities. And the reason that I wanted to do Duke of Edinburgh was because of the expedition part, where basically you get to go camping across the countryside. And to me, that sounded like a lot of fun. But the problem was you couldn't get the award if you just did the camping part. You also had to do a community element, which was like volunteering and helping out somewhere. You had to do a sport, which luckily I had covered. I'm not a sporty person at all, but I did happen to play this quite obscure sport, so that wasn't a problem.
Hang on, what obscure sport do you play?
I don't play it anymore, actually, but so the sport, I don't know if you'll have come across it, Brady. It's called goalball. It's a sport for blind people.
Right.
And the ball has a little bell inside so that all of the players can hear where on the court the ball is.
I have seen that played, yeah.
Yeah, I played that when I was at school. I was okay for the sporting element of the award. The tricky part was the skill, where you had to provide evidence that you had acquired some skill. And my sister was already having piano lessons, and I thought, oh, okay, I might as well, have piano lessons. So I went along to this lady whose name was Mrs. Cooper, and she seemed to teach everybody in my sort of local area of town. I think Mrs. Cooper was probably a little bit intimidated by me as a student, not because of my personality, but I think the normal way that children is that alongside that they learn how to read sheet music, and I wasn't able to read sheet music because of my eyesight. And so Mrs. Cooper had this student and yet had no idea how to teach me, really. But she was very, very patient, and she was very, very kind. And I went to her for 3 years learning piano.
Alan, do you think, we didn't mention you have got a visual impairment, which resulted in you learning music in this different way, and you don't use sheet music in any way. Do you think that has made you a different kind of musician to what you would have been if you could read sheet music?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many advantages to being able to read sheet music. The ability to be handed a piece of paper, sit down at your instrument and just play what's written. I would love to be able to do that. And I really admire musicians that can do that. The way I had to learn was purely by listening and then copying, so playing by ear. And of course, the best musicians in the world can also do that. They can just hear a piece of music and then reproduce it on their instrument. But that was my only option.
Right.
So the process was, to begin with, it was very laborious. I remember, Mrs. Cooper would play me one bar of music, which might be just 4 notes on the piano, and then I would have to repeat that back to her. And then she'd play me another bar of music, which would be maybe 6 notes, and I'd play that back. And then I remember actually after I'd had a piano lesson at Mrs. Cooper's house, I would pretty much run home because I had to get to the piano that was in my mum and dad's house, and I had to sit down and play what I had learned as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'd forget it.
But Alan, do you feel in any way, does this untethering from sheet music, while it has its disadvantages, do you think it's helped you on the composing side of things? Like it makes you a bit more creative or a bit more freestyly?
That's a great question. Yes, I think in a way it has been an advantage because I'm very, very dependent on listening, obviously, like any musician is. But for me, when I play with other musicians, for example, they might be reading from sheet music, and I had to learn how to fit in with a band. And I was really lucky growing up and when I went to university that there were lots of musicians around me. And so I had lots of opportunities to play with other people. And it meant that if I had a melodic idea in my brain, like a little tune, then I would just be able to perform that straight away on the piano. Just like how if you have a thought in your brain, you're able to speak that thought out loud without needing to think about it too much. So when it comes to composing, I feel like I do have not an advantage because I'm certain that other composers do this as well. But if I have an idea for a tune, then I can immediately kind of get that out of my brain and onto the keys of the piano without spending ages and ages trying to figure out the idea in my head.
Super.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It kind of does. I mean, I haven't got a musical bone in my body, as you well know, and as you will probably find out for the rest of this podcast. But when you have an idea then for a new tune or an idea in that obviously means you can't write it down. How do you capture it? Do you just have to make a recording that's an audio file that you can go back to a year later and go, oh yeah, that was a good idea I had, and just listen to it. That's your way of capturing it.
Yeah, so when I was learning piano, I didn't have any means of recording anything. So anything that I did compose, and I did try to start composing when I was I wouldn't have been as pretentious to call it composing, but I had certain melodies that would just stay in my brain. So I never had to write them down. I never had to record them. Of course, now with software like Audacity, which you can get for free, I'll just record if I have an idea. I've got a little dictaphone as well that I carry around. So if I have an idea for a tune, I'll just get the dictaphone out and sing into the dictaphone.
So what are your outlets for music now? Obviously, my video is about one, which I'm very grateful for. How else do you sort of outlet your music?
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I have lots of ways that I get to play live music. I play percussion for 2 choirs, the West End Singers and the Southampton Gay Men's Chorus, are both fantastic community choirs, and I play percussion to accompany them. I also play at my church. Not recently, of course, because of lockdown, but before then, every single week, I'd either play piano or guitar or percussion. And I feel like I'm very lucky at the church because there are some incredible musicians there. A professor of jazz at the university near the church, and he makes me feel ashamed. Every time he sits down at the piano, my mind is blown by his ability. And for a very long time, I pretended that I couldn't play piano, or I didn't want to play piano in front of this guy because he was so good, and I just stuck to playing percussion, which is much easier.
Did he give you the thumbs up when he finally heard you play piano? He thinks you're good enough?
He is a lovely man, and he was very gracious when he described my piano playing. He said that I had a very lyrical touch.
Oh, nice. Lyrical Touch. That could be the name for your next album. Alan Stewart, Lyrical Touch.
Lyrical Touch.
Let's speak about albums. Let's get to the business here, because the reason we're recording this is you've been working on like sort of a special project, bit of a pet project of yours, something unusual. Tell me what it's called and talk me through it.
Yeah, thanks. So there's an album called Tuplets for Toddlers, which I've helped to kind of coordinate.
You've sort of been a curator and an organizer of it, have you?
Yeah. So I've got 2 small children. My oldest son is 4.5, and he's just started at school. And my youngest son is 1.5. And they absolutely love listening to music. We have music on just all the time in the house.
Do you play the music?
I play the music, yeah. They play music. They've got loads and loads of toy instruments. We've got Spotify on. We've got music in the car. Just so much music in the house.
Yeah.
And some of the music they want to listen to, I find very tedious. Nursery rhymes. There are hundreds and hundreds of nursery rhymes available to listen to on Spotify. But after, the 50th time of the Wheels on the Bus, you get a bit bored. And so at the start of lockdown, I was kind of going a bit crazy listening to the same songs on repeat. And I thought, actually, I could record some nursery rhymes, but I could make them a little bit different, just to make them a bit more interesting for me. And I thought, and maybe other parents might appreciate this too, having familiar songs but performed in a slightly unfamiliar way. So I started recording my ideas, and my main kind of guiding principle was I wanted the tunes to be recognisable, so just traditional nursery rhymes, but I wanted to do something playful with the rhythm. I wanted to have some unusual timing going on that you don't often hear in kids' music. And in fact, you don't often hear in, pop music on the radio.
So you recorded some, you made some of these, did you?
I did about 12 recordings of my own where I was just experimenting with some new software that I'd got, which made it very, very easy to adjust things like the rhythm of a performance. And in fact, it felt like cheating, because what I was able to do was just play the Wheels on the Bus normally, and then in the software I could move the individual notes to produce a rhythm that I hadn't actually performed.
This is kind of like for adults, is it? Is it kind of like when you watch a kids' movie like Shrek that appeals to kids on a kids' level, but there's the occasional nod and the wink to the adults with like a slightly naughty joke that will go over the head of the kids? Are you doing the same thing with music? Is this like the kids will like it because it's Wheels on the Bus, but the adults will be like, oh, that's quirky, that's different, and the kids wouldn't even appreciate it?
I really like that analogy. That's an amazing analogy with Shrek. I think what I want to be able to say is that yes, I'm doing it for the adults, and maybe particularly adults who are themselves musical might appreciate some of these rhythmic ideas. But there is another purpose as well, which is when you hear something new in music, sometimes that can have a really big impact on you. Like, it might be just the sound of a particular chord. And I remember this from when I was a kid, just hearing some idea in a piece of music, and it would really stick with me, and I'd wonder, like, what's going on in that song? Why does that sound so good? Or why does that sound so sad? And so with this Tuplets for Toddlers album, my hope is that somewhere, maybe even subconsciously, a kid is going to listen to some of these rhythms and think, oh, that rhythm doesn't sound like what I'm used to. I wonder what's happening in that song.
Is toddler too young for that, though? Can a toddler have those thoughts? The sort of person who listens to Wheels on the Bus, are they also the sort of kid that's going to be able to think that deeply about music? Or is it more subliminal? Or
that's a great question as well. I think I think at that age it will be subliminal, and I don't think they would be conscious that there's something slightly strange about the music they're hearing. I think as you get older, you might be able to articulate that thought better in your brain. And then my hope would be that when adults listen to this music, they would recognise that there's something a little bit unusual about it, even if they don't know technically what's going on.
So, Alan, obviously at first this was just you playing around, but you've expanded this and turned this into kind of a real collaboration. Tell me how things expanded in this way.
So I made these 12 tracks and they were just kind of sketches, but it occurred to me that, well, like this sounds quite arrogant, but it occurred to me that the idea of this album, I'd never come across this idea before, like an album for children that is going to introduce them to some exciting rhythmic ideas. And I already had the name for the album, Tuplets for Toddlers, in my head. And I thought,
what is a tuplet?
We'll get onto that, Brady.
We'll come to that, okay.
We'll come to that. I had the title for this album, Tuplets for Toddlers, and I thought maybe, just maybe, some proper composers, professional composers, might kind of get the idea and might be quite excited by it. And one thing that I thought might have the appeal here is the tunes already exist. You know, the Wheels on the Bus melody, I think everybody knows that. And so the composer's job is going to be much narrower. Their task is to take this well-known tune and then do something fun with the rhythm. So I contacted David Bruce. He's a composer who has done a huge amount of work. He's had his work performed at the BBC Prom, and I thought I was probably shooting quite high, but I sent him an email just explaining, like, I'd like to make this album called Tuplets for Toddlers. It's going to introduce children to exciting rhythmic ideas. And I really got the sense from David Bruce that he understood straight away what this project would be, and he was really enthusiastic. He asked lots of really good questions that I hadn't thought about, and I feel like he really helped me to shape the project. Then I started contacting other composers. David Bruce has collaborated with some other musicians before on composition projects, so I thought, well, the logical people to contact is these other composers, and it kind of went from there.
And how many of you banded together? How many of you pulled together for this album?
I must have contacted maybe about 30, and 10 of them have contributed to the album. So
the album now exists. What's the purpose here? Is this going to make you a millionaire?
No. So
right.
Another purpose of the album is I thought it would be really appropriate if all of the money raised from the streams and the downloads were to go to charity. And the charity that we've chosen is Save the Children.
Okay, so this is all for a good cause as well.
It's all for a good cause.
All right then. This is the part I've been dreading because I'm so terrible at this, Alan. Tell me what a tuplet is and run me through a few examples of how this works. What's going on under the hood?
Sure. So I think to be able to understand why some of the ideas that the composers have used are so clever is you first of all have to have a basic understanding of how most nursery rhymes are counted.
Okay.
So the fundamental idea here is counting along with the music. So I'll play an example of a typical nursery rhyme and how it would typically be counted. So the nursery rhyme is Frère Jacques, and it's counted in 4 like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So there's not always 4 notes, but there's always like a counter 4.
That's right.
That the notes are sitting in.
Absolutely. So
couldn't you have just counted 3s instead? It seems arbitrary that you chose 4. You could have just counted 3.
Well, let's listen to what that sounds like, and there's going to be something a little bit off if I try counting to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
1, 2. Oh, I can't even do it. Hang on.
Okay.
It's so difficult. The reason that we count to 4 is this musical phrase. It's like a sentence. That is a little parcel of time, and the way that it's most logical to count it is by counting up to 4.
Okay. And is there a rule about how many notes you can stuff into that count?
So in simplistic terms, you can play a note that is the duration of a count of 1. You could play notes that last for a count of 2. You could play notes that last for a count of 3 or 4. Or you could subdivide that count into halves or into thirds. Now, to explain why some of these tracks are so clever with their counting, I'd like to use Frere Jacques again, but this time I'm going to count up to 8. To count up to 8, I'm going to have to count twice as fast, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
But if I didn't hear you counting, I wouldn't have noticed any difference.
No, of course not. But here's the clever bit. So the composer David Bennett has arranged Frere Jacques, but with a count of 7. Now, 7, it's an odd number, and it's a little bit odd in music as well. I cannot think of the last time I heard a song that was in 7 on the radio. What David Bennett has done is to take this Frere Jacques and perhaps imagined that it was counted in 8, like I just did, but then chopped off the last 8th. So if I count along, it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. Does that sound unusual to you?
Well, it's hard because I heard you counting. It was harder for me to concentrate on the notes you were playing, but it sounded like the notes were arranged or packed together in a more uncomfortable way.
That is such a good description. I think that's a great way to explain it. They are packed together, and it's a little bit uncomfortable because it's not what you're used to hearing. It's not what you're expecting. If I don't count with it, it sounds like the whole thing is rushing. It's kind of skipping ahead a bit.
Here's some of David Bennett's composition as featured on the album. You haven't told me what a tuplet is.
We'll get to that.
So David Bennett used 7, but David Bruce leveled up.
Because what he's doing is he's taken wind the bobbin up, which is normally a count of 4, and he's going to count up to 11. Now, I don't know what David Bruce's compositional process was, but the way that I understand what he's done is he's taken wind the bobbin up in 4 and then reimagined it in 6. Can I play you what that might sound like?
Can you play it to me normally first as a 4?
Of course, I'll play it normally in 4. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is very, very standard for a nursery rhyme. Now, like I say, I don't know how David Bruce imagined this as he was composing, but one way perhaps to understand it is take that same tune, but now let's have an underlying count of 6, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, already, that's a little bit odd for a nursery rhyme. You don't hear many nursery rhymes with that kind of count. But now imagine that we double the rate of counting to 12. So something like this. I'm not going to be able to count along with that, Brady, because I'm concentrating too hard. but I'm playing with my left hand twice as many notes. I played 12 notes in total. Now, what David Bruce has done is to cut off that last 12th. And the effect is, to me, when I first heard David Bruce's submission, it just made me laugh for joy. Like, not laughing at it, but just laughing, appreciating how it transformed this very, very normal nursery rhyme into something very peculiar indeed. Quite a few of the other composers, they've also taken this idea of taking a normal count of 4 and maybe adding to it or subtracting from it. So I've played all of the songs to my 2 sons, and their favourite one by far is the one that Ben Levine has done, which is Bingo. And what Ben Levine has done is to count up to 5, basically. And yeah, that's odd to have 5 underlying the music, but it's there throughout the piece. I cannot sample what Ben Levine has done because he is a creative genius, and the only way to fully appreciate why it's so good is to listen to it.
Okay, let's have a little listen.
Nolte is another composer who's contributed to this, and what she's done is kind of the same as David Bruce, in that you could count along with her London Bridge by counting up to 11. But actually, when you listen to it, it's far, far more logical to count 6, 5, and then 5, 6.
Oh, so changing the count during the song.
Exactly. So we're kind of cranking up the complexity level here by having the count changing. Now, 12 Tone, who is another composer on the album, has taken this idea of changing the count, and he's taken it to an extreme. Can I read out the counting that is required for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?
Of course.
I don't know how interesting this would be to listen to on a podcast, but I don't know. Okay, so in Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, in order to count along successfully, you need to count 3, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1.
Well, that's just gone crazy. It occurs to me, Alan, this would be a great way to send secret messages to people, like through like coding it into the timing of a song, like play some weird bit of music, and only other composers would be able to tell what the secret message was.
Brady, it's been done.
Has it?
How, in fact, Brady,
everything.
How do you know, Brady, that I haven't done it in a Numberphile video?
Oh, I expect it has been done.
Yeah. So, yeah, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star takes the idea of counting and it just pushes it as far as it can go. And it's like, when I heard Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, immediately I felt like it was a challenge. Like, I wanted to be able to count along with this music. And, you know, I'm not ashamed to say it took me about probably 20 minutes to be able to nail down exactly how this music has been counted. It's just so complicated.
Is that a humble brag, Alan?
Mate,
That sounds like a humble brag. It was so complicated. It took me 20 minutes.
well,
It would take me a lifetime.
yeah.
You still haven't told me what a tuplet is.
Here we are. We've arrived.
All right.
So,
Thank goodness.
the quintessential tuplets on the Tuplets for Toddlers album have been performed for us by Sean Crowder, a jazz and electronic drummer. And I think being a drummer, perhaps he has got a lot of experience with time and counting. And what he's done is Itsy Bitsy Spider, but he is counting in a way which is, well, fundamentally, it's the same as what everyone else has done, except this is to do with the speed at which he's counting. So when you first start listening to Sean Crowder's Itsy Bitsy Spider, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's a count of 4. Because he even starts the song by clapping 1, 2, 3, 4. And you could probably listen to the whole track and not even detect that anything strange is happening at all. And I think I can say that with confidence because when I first heard this concept of tuplets in a song, I couldn't recognize, like, my brain wasn't wired to be able to identify what was going on with the rhythm, and I heard it wrong. So Brady, for Itsy Bitsy Spider, I've sent you a clip of me counting along to it, and I think what makes this special is the speed at which I have to count, because what Sean Crowder has done is to take these regular beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's subdivided them into tuplets. A tuplet is when you take a beat and you cut it up into equal duration segments, but the number of segments that you cut it into is in some way unusual. And so what Sean Crowder's done is to cut it into 5. And when you cut a beat into 5, that's known as a quintuplet. Counting along to quintuplets is not easy. Physically vocalizing the count requires practice. And you'll hear it in the clip, but the way that some drummers count this is they count 1 tiki-taka, 2 tiki-taka, 3 tiki-taka, 4 tiki-taka. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 tiki-taka, 2 tiki-taka, 3 tiki-taka, 4 tiki-taka, 1 tiki-taka, 2 tiki-taka, 3 tiki-taka, 4 tiki-taka. It's quite an unusual idea to use quintuplets, and it's very difficult to find songs that use quintuplets. It is possible, and increasingly musicians are starting to incorporate these into their songs. And my hope is that if little children get to hear quintuplets at a young age, they're going to be ready, or at least better prepared than most grown-ups are for understanding what's going on.
Sort of more sophisticated nursery rhymes is kind of conditioning children to appreciate and explore more sophisticated music.
I think so, yeah. It's exposing them to something that they probably wouldn't hear unless they went searching for it, and I'm not sure how many toddlers are au fait with the Spotify interface.
Alan, why haven't nursery rhymes been written like this before? Why is this sort of, experimental and new? Surely evolution would have seen these more experimental nursery rhymes exist. Is there something wrong with them? Is there a reason they're not suited to kids?
That's a great question. So why hasn't someone done this before? I think the reason that these ideas haven't been utilised is possibly because they do sound strange. Like you yourself, Brady, described Frere Jacques in 7 as sounding a bit uncomfortable. I don't want to say it doesn't sound nice, but it doesn't sound like what we're used to hearing. Another reason, I think, is that psychologically and physically, some of these rhythms are very difficult to perform. And later on, I'll get onto polyrhythm, which is where you're counting 2 different rates simultaneously. And that is hard to do for the musician.
So one of the reasons we don't have these complex nursery rhymes is just because they're complex. They're hard to play. They're hard to...
Yeah, I think so. But also, there is something slightly uncanny about some of them, perhaps because we're so conditioned to hearing songs that have this counting scheme of 4 that whenever we hear a different counting scheme, something in our brain says, oh, that's a bit odd. Like literally odd.
Alan, do you think this is a nice album? Do you think this is a nice, good listen? Like, are people going to enjoy this? Or is this like, an intellectual exercise where a bunch of composers have slapped themselves on the back and said, aren't we clever? But to listen to it is not a pleasant experience.
I think this album can be enjoyed by anyone. And I think it would be totally possible to listen through and not feel like anything was weird. I think it's got this added layer for all of the mathematics nerds and all of the music nerds that we've got some really complicated stuff going on underneath.
I'll tell you what I liked about it. I had a listen to it earlier today, like from start to finish. And the thing that I liked was it did seem a bit odd and interesting and experimental, but because you were using such familiar, famous songs from my childhood, it had this kind of nostalgia working for it. So it was kind of like, all right, I'm willing to go with this because you're also making me have these warm feelings about childhood. I think that's kind of the cleverness of it. You've kind of smuggled the new stuff in by, it's like you've sugar-coated something that's complicated with enough nostalgia that I'm willing to go with you for the ride.
Thank you, Brady. That
you can put that quote on the album cover if you like.
Yeah. That's a great quote. That's a great quote. Because, I haven't wanted to play this to loads of people because, of course, these composers have sent in their work and it's kind of, it's a project, it's in progress. And so it's really interesting, Brady, to hear what your reaction to it is. Yeah. And I don't mean this at all offensively, Brady, but as you've said yourself, like, you don't have loads of musical training. And so it's particularly interesting to hear what your impression of it was. All of the tracks so far have involved taking a familiar tune and changing the underlying counting scheme. In Three Blind Mice, which is the one that I did, what I've done is something called polyrhythm. So there are actually 2 counts going on at the same time. With my left hand, I'm counting up to 4, and that's 4 equal divisions of time. And with my right hand, I'm counting up to 3. But the important thing here is that my counting to 4 and my counting to 3 are taking the same period of time. So with my right hand, I'm having to play slower. Now, polyrhythm does get used. You won't hear it in most songs on the radio, but it's a nice device, and some of the composers have taken this idea of counting to different numbers and they've really gone to an extreme. So in Row, Row, Row the Boat, there are 4 different counts running simultaneously by the time you get to the end of the track.
Wow.
And I would challenge anyone to figure out what those counts are. They're whole numbers, but it's good fun to listen to that one. Row, Row, Row the Boat was by 8-Bit Music Theory. London's Burning, taking this idea of perhaps different parts, different instruments that are all playing the same tune, but counting at different rates. So London's Burning uses a very, very old technique called mensuration canon. Mensuration canon was very popular in the 15th and 16th century. And what composers liked to do with it was kind of show off their mathematical prowess by following some very strict rules and then creating music that sounded nice. Can I explain what the rules are in mensuration canon?
You can try.
I can try. So I'll simplify it. In London's Burning, which is a great example for this, there are basically 3 different lengths of note. There are short notes, there are long notes, and there are very long notes. Now, the long notes are twice as long as the short ones, and the very long notes are 4 times as long as the short notes. And that's the way that London's Burning would normally be played, in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. In the version that's on Tuplets for Toddlers, we've got 4 different instruments, and they're all playing London's Burning, but the ratio of the note lengths is different for each instrument.
Right.
Can I tell you what the ratios are?
Go ahead.
This one has been arranged by Sam Shackleton, and what he's got is the clarinet playing the normal tune in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. Then he's got an oboe playing in 1 to 2 to 6. He's got a flute playing 1 to 3 to 6, and a bassoon playing 1 to 3 to 9. Now, not all of the instruments start together, but what Sam Shackleton has managed to do is to kind of stagger their start time so that the finished piece sounds quite pleasant. I will admit that if Sam had not sent me a 3-page document explaining what he'd done, I would never have been I can't listen to it and think, oh yeah, there's a ratio of 1 to 3 to 9.
Yeah.
But it's in there, and I think it's very clever.
I was hoping you were going to drop the golden ratio on me there or something like that, or pi.
Well, some composers have taken this idea of playing the same melody at different speeds, and they've taken the idea and run really as far as possible. So there's a composer called Conlon Nancarrow who liked to incorporate some irrational ratios in his music. So, for example, he's got a piano piece where it's the same melody, but the ratio at which these melodies are played is E to pi.
That's just making my brain melt, so.
Yeah. So if you're looking for the most complicated rhythmic concept on the album, look no further than Ants Go Marching, which Adam Neely has arranged. What he has done is to take all of the ideas that we've looked at and kind of blend many of them together and created something of a monster.
Right.
There's no way that I could ever perform this, and if I'm honest, when I listen to it, I'm not sure that I can follow all of the stuff that's happening. So the song starts out at 78 beats per minute, but straight away there's something a little bit off, because rather than subdividing the beat into 4, which might be quite normal, Adam Neely has subdivided it into 7. Then what he starts to do is accentuate every 6th tuplet. So they become slightly stronger, and what we now get is an increase in speed by a very specific ratio of 7/6. So for verse 2, it's now slightly faster by a factor of 7/6. But not content with that, Adam Neely has also changed the tuplet division to quintuplets. Then every 4th quintuplet starts to be accented, and it becomes the new pulse, the new beat. and we modulate into a new tempo. We've increased the speed again, but this time by a factor of 5/4. But he's also changed the tuplet division. Now the beats are going to have 4 subdivisions in them.
Nursery rhymes are supposed to be simple, Alan.
I know. It's crazy. Then, as his final flourish, he's got every beat subdivided into 4. And what he does is to take one of those subdivisions, increase its length by 50%, and allow that to become the new count. So we get another tempo increase, but this time by a factor of 4/3. But not satisfied with just simply increasing the tempo, we also change the subdivision into triplets. Obviously, we've been talking about all these different ways of counting and subdividing time. And so the track that's been submitted by Jessica Keon doesn't have any counting.
What do you do then?
Well, you should listen to it. There's no underlying pulse at all. And if you try to impose some kind of regular count on it, you'll never succeed.
Like a prime number.
Just like I wrote that down in my notes, Brady. It cannot be subdivided into equal units. What I think is interesting about this concept in music, which is called free time, is it can be very, very difficult to perform because musicians are trained to play along with a pulse. And when you take that pulse away, what do you have to cling on to?
But also, does that make it hard to enjoy? Because isn't our enjoyment of music us subconsciously enjoying patterns? And if you take away all the patterns, are you taking away some of the enjoyment of music?
Yeah, music is patterns modified by humanity. No, you're right. I think that's a great question about can it be enjoyed if it doesn't have that underlying pattern? I would say yes, because it does still have melody and it sounds very pleasant.
What do you want people to do? What should people do if they're intrigued by this, and how can they not be? Presumably you want them to go and buy this thing or download it or listen to it, or what's the call to action here?
It would be fantastic if people went to have a listen on Spotify or wherever they want to listen, and if they want to buy it, then all of the money from purchases is going to go to save the children.
Amazing. I will include links in the notes for this podcast for people to go and click on and do that, or you can search out Tuplets for Toddlers. Amazing. What next? Are you already working on the second album?
Well, I've just started back at college after a long summer holiday, so I don't think I'm going to be doing much music for a while.
Back to the classroom. That's all for today, but I really encourage you to check out Tuplets for Toddlers. You'll see links in all the usual places. Also, thanks to all the composers and musicians who've been part of the project, many of whom you've heard featured today. This album is a fascinating listen for old and young alike, and your downloads and listens are a nice way to encourage the musicians involved, and remember, all the money raised is going to save the children. I'm Brady Harron, and you've been listening to the Numberphile podcast.